Good afternoon. I'm Kes Dugdale and I'm the Director of the John Smith Centre here at the University of Glasgow. We exist to make the positive case for politics and public service, and we try and do that in three key ways. Through research, studying the relationship between the public and their politicians, through our various internship and development programmes designed to break down the barriers that people face accessing public life, and through advocacy work with events like today's, discussing the role of local government in the delivery of public services. And we are delighted to be joined today by Alison Evison, who was re-elected in last Thursday's election to represent the Mearns ward in the Aberdeenshire Council. This is a John Smith Centre Power Hour, which means that we will spend the next 60 minutes looking at our guests' past, including their journey into politics, their thoughts on current issues, and their hopes and fears for the future. Councillor Evison was elected as the 15th president of CoSLA and only the 3rd female president of the organisation in 2017. We'll hear a little bit more about the work of CoSLA shortly. But before becoming a councillor, Alison worked as a teacher of history, modern studies and English for 25 years. This event is recorded so that we can make it available to people to watch in their own time and to share it through their own networks here at the University of Glasgow and further afield. If you are watching live and would like to ask a question of our guest, you can do so through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and those will come through to our colleagues here at the John Smith Centre. Alison, welcome to the John Smith Centre.
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon, Kes. It's great to see you again.
Likewise, you are most welcome. So let's get into the thick of it. And first of all, can you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and how you found your politics?
Yeah, I grew up in Gravesend in Kent, which is the North Kent coast on the River Thames, and just outside London. And I grew up in a house that was quite political, I suppose. My father in particular was very involved in politics. One of his closest friends at the time was Albert Murray, who was a junior minister in Harold Wilson's government. And I remember being taken along to things at the local Labour Party with Michael Foot. I remember seeing Michael Foot as a child and being totally impressed by Michael Foot when I was about 7 years old, which probably is not what you'd expect to say of that. He also was the chair of the Workers' Educational Association in the town. And this meant that there were lectures and discussions held in what I remember as very dark and empty church hall buildings and other places, to which I was dragged at a very early age to make up the audience. So I heard lots of social and political lectures from a very, very young age, but that was kind of the background at home, and Sunday afternoons were traditional, sit around the dinner table and discuss whatever at the end of that. So that was my background. But I didn't actually get involved in anything, of course, till I was older. And when I was a teenager, Gravesend was a town which had, it still does, large population from the West Indies, second generation, obviously, mostly at that time. But many of my friends were from that background. And I remember various occasions when you'd go out together, be in the street somewhere, and they would be stopped. They would be stopped by the police and searched. And I remember at the age of 16, 17, finding that totally unacceptable. Why? We're all out in the same place doing the same things. And those of us who are white aren't being stopped. So that really got me involved in politics, because I saw the injustice of that and the unfairness of that. It was around the time of the Brixton riots as well. So, you know, that was a context in which I formed my opinions about inclusion, about equality, about social justice, about anti-racism. And that really dominated my thinking moving on. And it came from that personal experience as a teenager in the town in which I lived. So that's really the background of how I got involved. But then I wasn't involved for a long time. I wasn't involved in politics after that early radical stage till about 2011. It was, you know, there was a long gap in my involvement. Life took over, family took over, travelled and lived in other countries around the world as well. And that became my background at that time. Though I did do some representation when we lived in Germany, and I became elected as the class rep for my children's class. Now, this was quite amazing at the time because it was in Germany, in a German primary school, and I was the only non-German speaker parent in the class. But they elected me to that role, and I remember at the time suddenly feeling a great responsibility when the German government at the time passed a rule that that minorities had to be represented in school parent councils. They had to be there. The school turns around to me and says, it's okay, we don't need to change anything, we've got Alison anyway, which was fair enough. But at that point, I felt a real responsibility to represent the Turkish families living in the town. So I remember going around the houses of the Turkish parents and introducing myself to them. And that really was the beginning of representing people at that stage, that responsibility to represent the Turkish community in the German town in which I was living.
So after 25 years of teaching, you find yourself in Scotland, in the northeast of the country, and you decide to stand to become a councillor in an area not really known for its Labour vote. How did you get elected? How did that all come about?
I was actually inspired to stand for election in the first place by the students I was teaching at school. There was a particular advanced higher history class who was very interested in current affairs and getting involved in things, and they kind of challenged me to stand for election. I think that was one of the things that influenced my thinking at that point as well. I was obviously back to my roots, Labour Party roots at that time, and got involved in the 2011 election actually, and the campaigning in that really inspired me as well, for campaigning for 2011, and supported the team very much in that. And after that, I was asked to stand in the North Kincardine ward in Aberdeenshire for the Labour Party. It was a risk because it meant I had to give up a permanent teaching job to be able to stand and campaign. And at the time there weren't permanent jobs being given out. So I was giving up a job with no chance of getting a permanent one in return. So there was a risk involved in that. But I suppose I was up for a challenge. I was up for that kind of risk in what I was doing. And I stood. I stopped teaching in December 2011, and I spent from January till the May election campaigning, 3 sessions a day, most of them on my own, going around knocking on doors, talking to people, getting known in the community, attending community events, community councils, that hard graft to get elected, to get myself known, and obviously got elected in 2012 as a result of all that.
At the John Smith Centre, we're really interested in trying to encourage people to disagree better, to work across party lines, to try and encourage coalitions of like-minded people to work together for the common good. Is it fair to say that you had to do that work then to build a kind of coalition of support for yourself, because it wasn't the most fertile territory for the Labour Party, or is it the case that there actually was a very solid vote for that particular party and you just had to turn it out? It always struck me as your experience might be a bit different from your average councillor.
There was suspected to be a nucleus of a Labour vote in the area, which is why that was the ward I was asked to stand in. So that was the reason for standing there. I think that the nucleus of the vote was just that, though, and it needs to be built up in order to win a seat there. And so it was that community engagement that really mattered. I mean, I was interested in standing from my experience of being a teacher as well, seeing things in education. I thought we could do things differently. We could do things more pupil-centred, child-centred. That kind of work was just in its embryonic stage at the time. Obviously, schools have moved on a lot since then, but at the time I felt, maybe we're not listening to the pupil voice enough. We're not supporting people. We're not working in a multi-agency way to support looked after children the way we could do. And then my own experience as well of needing medical care for my own children and finding how difficult that was in a rural area to achieve that, and seeing the differences and inequalities between the care you'd get in an urban area and the rural area. So recognizing things like that was what inspired me to stand. But that background also gave me something in common with the people I was talking to when I knocked on those doors. That appreciation of being a parent, wanting the best for your children, being able to engage at that point was really important. And I think I picked up a lot of support from parents, actually, appreciating my lived experience being similar to theirs. And that maybe brings on to something else that's really important as well. That lived experience, you as a politician come with a background, with experiences that you've had, and other people can relate to those as well, because they're sharing them, and being able to talk about that and try and work out how to drive things forward is a way that's really important, I think, both at a local level and at a more national level as well.
You mentioned right at the start there that you were successfully re-elected to Aberdeenshire Council, albeit for a slightly different ward this time around, but as an independent, not as a Labour candidate. Can you tell the audience why you didn't stand for Labour this time around?
Yeah, there are lots of reasons, but I suppose the ones most relevant to this conversation. I mean, I've spent the last 5 years as CoSLA President. That role has been very much apolitical, cross-party, working in partnership with other people, working with people from all parties and of no parties. It's involved a national role that has been the mandate's been from the CoSLA membership as a whole, and hasn't had that political bent to it at all. And so I've got that experience for 5 years, and in that experience, what has come, my passion is local government and what local government can achieve, and what local government can achieve, particularly when it's empowered and resourced to do so. And that background of thinking what we can do in our councils, if only, is really what's driving me at this moment as well. And a nagging feeling that across all the parties in the Scottish Parliament, not just one of them, but across all of them, there isn't that appreciation of what local government can do. There isn't that appreciation of local choice being important. I think we've seen it in the discussions around the workplace parking levy, for example, which was proposed originally as an example of discretionary local taxation, as something that could give councils, if they so chose, a way of increasing funding to deliver services that people in the area wanted to deliver in that area. That was the background to it, but it's got hijacked across the political system in every way, and it's being looked at, nationally. People are saying our party will never support this, or vice versa, and that's not what it's about. And that kind of frustration about that localness, that importance of local empowerment not being recognised enough by the parties, made me. I want to be able to talk local government, and I want to be able to do that across the piece and carry on supporting the empowerment and resourcing of local government. So I think that's an important aspect of why I am where I am on my own journey at the moment. The other aspect was a touch of realism as well. I knew that the chances were, if I did stand for Labour, I would be the only Labour councillor again. I've been the only Labour councillor for the last 5 years in Aberdeenshire, and before that there were only 2 of us. In that position in particular, it is really important to be able to work with others in partnership to get things done locally. And and the thought that maybe I wouldn't be able to develop the partnerships I would need to develop to get things done locally was a concern to me as well, because you need to be able to work with others at the local government level, and that is crucial that is done in a way that's appropriate to the local areas. So that was the other particular driving force as well. If I was going to be elected, I wanted to be in a position to work for my constituents, to work with the people across the Mearns, and deliver for what they'd elected me to do.
Lots of questions about what you've just said, particularly around the forming of coalitions and whether minority administrations can be effective, and everything that happened last Thursday. I'd like to get to with you in a second or two, but just before I do that, I don't want to presume that everybody that's watching will understand what CoSLA is and what CoSLA does. Would you mind just giving us a quick primer on CoSLA and your role just before we get to the meat of last week's election?
Yeah, thanks, Kezia. CoSLA is a membership organisation for all 32 local councils across Scotland, and it works as the voice for local government in Scotland. Anyone who's an office bearer within CoSLA or is mandated by the members of CoSLA, so we're mandated by the CoSLA delegates from all 32 authorities to develop policies and speak on their behalf. And it's important that we're speaking of that voice of Scottish local government. At CoSLA, the advantage of this organisation is that we are able to be that voice of local government at the decision-making table and work with partners in Scottish government, with the UK government, and further afield. I mean, I was involved in working across Europe as well, and through the UN. There's various bits of the UN's work I've been involved in as well. So it's that voice of local government is ensuring our councils at the decision-making table and the discussion table from which decisions are then made after that point. So we give CoSLA, our councils, that voice. CoSLA also is important in trading standards, is an organisation, is part of CoSLA, which many people will be aware of trading standards and the work they do, as to is Business Gateway, is that's part of CoSLA as well. So that relates from the fact that, you know, CoSLA, local councils across Scotland employ 240,000 people across Scotland. Now, they're one of the biggest local employers themselves, and it's spending £19 billion a year. You know, they're huge economic power in that as well, and how that money is spent locally to support communities is absolutely essential. So CoSLA gives our councils that voice, takes that voice to the people who are making decisions about Scotland, about the UK, about the wider world. We represented CoSLA local government at COP last year, for example. You know, it's really important to be that voice at COP, and obviously not everybody could go there, but CoSLA could go on behalf of the members who mandated it. So that was important there as well.
Thank you, that's really helpful, particularly for the students that might be watching this. So last Thursday, we had the local government elections in Scotland. That meant that all 32 local authorities were up for election, with all of the councillors within the respective councils being up for election as well, which is different to what happens elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And we know that 30 of the 32 local authorities returned no majority administration, and that there's lots of processes underway just now to look at what coalitions or minority administrations and confidence and supply might come from that. But there were two council areas where one party had a working majority. The first was in Dundee, where the SNP will be able to govern the city on their own, and secondly was in Western Bartonshire, where Labour were able to do the same. The campaigning organisation Women 50/50, an organisation that we're both fans of, Alison reported this morning, that they've done the number crunching of the 1,228 councillors elected last Thursday, and they think that 35% of them are women, which is up 6% from the last local government elections. A good bit of progress, but arguably, certainly from our perspective, not good enough. And they're still crunching the numbers in terms of what that breakdown will look like with regards to disability, ethnicity and other protected characteristics. What else do you know about what happened last Thursday? Have you got anything to add to that list of where we're at currently?
Well, no, that's a good summary. I mean, it's difficult to know more than that at the moment, because councillors elected obviously have to fill in our surveys now, and it's only from that people will know, and not all disabilities, for example, are visible. So people won't know necessarily the background of everyone until councillors fill in those surveys now that they've been elected. So that information will become really important to be able to analyse whether we have made a difference and whether we have increased the diversity in elected office, which was one of my key aims as president of CoSLA, to do that. Yeah, I saw those figures this morning, up from 29% of councillors being women to 35%, which is a positive increase. Obviously, it is a staging point on a journey, and we've still got a way to go from that. But within that, I do think there's promising signs of the increased diversity in other ways. There do seem to be more BME candidates, for example, have been elected, and hearing news about disabled candidates as well. Now, obviously, the extent of this will only become known once the surveys are filled in. But it does seem that there is increased diversity on what we had last time. And that is crucial when you think about the decisions that council makes for their communities. If councils don't accurately reflect the communities which they represent, you know, their decisions won't be affecting everybody in the right way. They won't be including everybody in their decision making. So to increase that diversity, to make our councils even more representative, is absolutely crucial. We did a lot of work in CoSLA in the last few years to try and increase the diversity, work very closely, not only with Women 50/50, as you've described, but also with the organisation Elect Her. And I was actually really pleased on election at the count on Friday to meet two newly elected female councillors from Aberdeenshire who'd both met each other. They were both from different parties, but they'd met each other as part of the peer support groups organised by Elect Her. And there they were congratulating each other to having been elected, and were talking about the support they'd got from being in the same peer support group. And it just underlined the importance of that kind of work. They were from different parties as well, you know, and we talked about the importance of, we're representing different ideas, we're coming from different backgrounds, but we've all got a lot in common in that we are standing up to represent communities, and you know, that how we can support each other in a cross-party way is absolutely essential as well. So I was particularly pleased to meet those two and hear their story and see their mutual squeaks of excitement as they've both actually been elected. But yeah, CoSLA itself did lots of work as well. As I said, we developed parental leave, family leave for for councillors that could be adopted by councils across Scotland, because we recognise that one problem was that councillors aren't treated as employees, and they aren't employees, so we didn't have any rights to any kind of family leave, so we've got guidance developed for that. We recognise that some of the biggest worries that people had and put them off standing were things like the dangers of lone working. So we've developed guidance to support people when they're working on their own, and also the whole idea of the incivility in public life, the disrespect and abuse that people experience was putting people off as well. So trying to work with the 4 local government associations across the UK to address that as well. But I must say that the biggest barrier to increased diversity in local government is the salary level, the pay level that councils are receiving. That came up again and again as something that was putting people off standing for the work. If you think about the average hours from a survey we did at CoSLA, the average hours that people work in a week as a councillor and the amount of money they earn, they're being paid at less than the living wage, which, you know, when it's not going to encourage people from diverse backgrounds to step forward. So it was good just before the election that we had an agreed statement between myself as CoSLA President and Ben McPherson from the Scottish Government, acknowledging this situation and agreeing to work at pace to investigate the situation and try and bring about change. I think I will be holding the Scottish Government to those words, at pace, because it says something that does need to change if we are going to fundamentally improve the diversity in elected office.
Well, that's fascinating to hear, and such important work. Is there any sense within that about what you think the salary should be? Is it going to be a case of maybe tying it to median income across Scotland, or has it just got to be substantially better than it currently is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that it's below the living wage, the hours people work, I mean, we're arguing for the living wage to be paid across the piece to everybody, and yet councillors aren't paid it themselves. I mean, I think that's obviously a starting point from that, and see what comes up from the survey that's going to be done and the work that's going to be done with the Scottish Government now. But certainly the salary levels at the moment are acting as a huge barrier across the political parties and across the regions of Scotland to people standing. Well, I think a statistic that did worry me was to see that, you know, there's some seats in Scotland that are vacant that weren't filled in the election because not enough people stood for elected office. Not enough people stood. You know, that is not supporting our local democracy at all. And we need to make it possible for people to stand so we don't get situations like that in the future as well.
Now, I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, Alison, but are you aware of any of the statistics around the breakdown of hours worked across gender? Because obviously lots of people do in the role of a councillor as a full-time job, others do it in addition to other employment. I wondered if that broke down differently across the genders, whether it's maybe harder for women in particular to do it on a full-time basis at that salary level.
We found in our survey we did at CoSLA that a lot of women, the figure escapes me at the moment, but a lot of women don't stand for re-election. They don't stand a second time, and the reason for that is the affordability of doing the work, managing the caring responsibilities in a great sense. So it certainly affects the re-election. We have an awful lot of women across Scotland that stand for one term of office and then don't stand again, and that is in itself a big negative, because it means the experience they're taking with them, the knowledge they're taking with them, you know, what they've gained in the job, and suddenly that's lost as they don't stand again. Obviously people won't always want to stand a second term, but we've got to remove the barriers that prevent them from standing again. And that is a big barrier at the moment, is the levels of salary they're getting.
Whilst there's no doubt very specific circumstances affecting local government, that is a trend that we see in both the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament as well, where women are leaving elected office at a younger age than their male counterparts with fewer years served. I think it's high time that we took some serious action to understand the reasons in evidence as to why that's the case and what can be done to address it. And we will return to that in a second, but I just want to go back a little bit to this notion of coalitions and minority administrations. And I don't know how you feel about this, but just looking at how things were shaking out in the newspapers over the weekend, as I understand it, that the SNP have said that they won't deal with the Tories, and the Lib Dems say they won't deal with the SNP, Labour say they won't work with the SNP or the Tories. What do you think of that? Is that going to stick? Will that last the next 7 days, or is something going to have to give?
I think things will give. I think things will give as it becomes important to establish administrations that work, that are stable, and that can deliver for local communities. I mean, I think everybody has that in their heart, whatever party that they've been elected for. You know, they need a council administrations that can deliver for communities, and the essential services delivered by our councils are absolutely essential. There'll be lots of discussions going on at the moment, lots of discussions both locally and with the political parties that have set the rules about what they're allowed to do and what they're not going to do as well, and we will see what comes at the end of it. I mean, at the end of the day, there's 32 local authorities, only 2 have got a majority, the others will you know, well, there's the islands as well, I think, and know where they are as well. But we will wait and see what comes as a result of the discussions. I mean, obviously, there's the possibility that in some councils we have minority administrations set up as well, and that's an option as well for councils. I served as co-leader of not a minority administration, but a very tight numbers game administration. And at that point, we had a competence and supply agreement with another group to make sure that things, you have to get your budget passed. I mean, that's the basic thing for accounts, is to be able to get your budget passed, to make sure things like that happened. Minority administrations can work. They take a lot of time, though, to ensure that every issue that you have that might be controversial is discussed, is agreement is sought and support is developed for it. And I suppose my fear about that is, well, first of all, the increased hours that takes. You know, is it possible for everyone to do that? But secondly, does it become a bit of an echo chamber? Are you talking to yourselves? Are you talking to the people that are other councils rather than thinking out to communities? You know, is that the loss that happens then? That the community engagement you might be doing, the voice you're listening to outside, might not be as strong, because what you're trying to do is listen to each other and try and get an agreement to make sure that the process that you're trying to get through does go through. So minority administrations can work. Investment in time and energy to make them work is huge, though, and maybe that impacts the kind of people that can lead on them as well.
So just a reminder to our audience that they can put their own questions forward just by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of their screens, and that will come through to the team here. I have plenty, though. I'm gonna keep going, and Alison, in that regard. I wrote at the Times over the weekend about what I considered to be an effective coalition, which was the one between Labour and the SNP in Edinburgh from 2012 to 2017. And the reason I was particularly a fan of that was I thought it represented good politics, because what the parties did was they came together and they agreed 50 things that they were going to do over 5 years, and then they systematically or methodically worked their way through those 50 things and reported to the people about whether those things were being progressed. And if other things came up, then they went back into negotiations and votes would shake out whatever way that they were going to. But there was 50 things that were going to get done regardless. Can you point to other examples around the country where you've seen coalitions work well like that, perhaps of different political party makeups, and perhaps explain to our audience what is the actual functioning difference between a coalition and a confidence and supply arrangement?
I myself was very sort of admiration for the Edinburgh scheme, and when we set up a co-leadership in Aberdeenshire, it was actually the basis of the Edinburgh model that we adopted and made change to suit Aberdeenshire's needs. But basically, that was the model of the document we were following. Because you're right, it did set out very clearly that what the responsibilities and roles of everyone was, and how decisions would be reached, but also the vision and you know what we are going to achieve in that time. And yes, working methodically to achieve that is absolutely essential. So yes, I learned from that myself and adopted that where we were in Aberdeenshire when we had our co-leadership here, because it was a scheme that worked. I mean, we worked here on that same basis as well, I suppose. We worked as a co-leadership when myself as a Labour group leader shared the leadership with the SNP in Aberdeenshire for 2 years. That worked as well on a similar basis. It worked on the basis of trust, what you were doing, and it worked from being very clear at the beginning about shared vision and what you're going to do, and also what you're not going to get involved in, where the power of local government can't get involved, where there's issues that you can't make a difference. So let's park those because we can't do anything on them anyway, and sticking to that. The other reason it worked was because we involved everybody in the groups as well. You know, it's very much clearly a voice for everybody, and people were listened to within that as well. And I think that's an important part of it as well. So I'll put that in the way as another example of a good practice one. You asked for the difference about a coalition is obviously a formal agreement, like the ones we talked about there, you know, where there's something written down as a formal agreement of how you're actually going to do things, and you are going to be working together throughout the piece on those issues that you've outlined at the beginning. A competence and supply is different in that you don't actually join together. It's a far more informal. You are not bound to each other in any way, but you do promise that you will support on particular issues as long as X, Y, and Z are included in them. So it's that specific agreement, and obviously that's really particularly important in terms of getting a budget passed, that you can be confident that you will be supported by somebody else to get your budget passed. But to do that, maybe you've got to include a couple of aspects in your budget that you weren't going to include otherwise, but you're persuaded to include them in order to get that budget passed. And then that agreement falls away again afterwards once the budget's passed, and you work more informally again as well. So that is another option for councils to work together. It does encourage discussion, and obviously, from my view of local democracy and local accountability, that discussion is absolutely crucial. We're all serving the same communities. We might come from different political persuasions, but the people we're working with are the same. And if we're listening to the voice of lived experience, if we're engaging with our communities, we'll be hearing the same things from them. So there's an awful lot that is in common to develop as well as you move forward. So we will see what happens across Scotland. I imagine there'll be some coalitions formed. I imagine there'll be some confidence and supply agreements, and obviously there'll be some people who are going on their own as a minority administration as well. I think the key behind it all, though, is what works in your area and gives the stability that the people in your area need to ensure that the services they need on a daily basis are delivered, and that partners can be worked with in a positive way to make the difference locally as well. And that democratic accountability is really what's at the heart of everything you're doing.
I'm going to come on shortly to ask you about the changing nature of local government over the past 15 years in particular. We're also going to touch on the National Care Service and also the degree to which local authorities can play their part in addressing the cost of living crisis that the country is currently facing. But just before we get to that, and I'm sorry to make you the arbiter, the person who's going to define the dictionary definition between a coalition and a confidence and supply agreement, but I do think it matters at the moment because of what the parties have said about their unwillingness to create formal coalitions with each other. If one party agrees to do a deal with another party in order to pass their budget, and for the price of those budget votes, it's getting 3 of its policies implemented. And they're also prepared to share convenerships, so that they're going to have different people from different political parties lead particular policy portfolios within a council. How is that not a coalition?
But if you're sharing convenerships, if you're sharing roles like that does then become a coalition, because you're working together in the same aims. The confidence and supply arrangements that I've known haven't involved that level of agreement. It's been the policy initiatives to get through on particular things. I think if you get into the stage of sharing jobs and having people from another party leading on particular areas and leading policy, leading discussions, then that becomes a coalition, because you reach that formal agreement to do that. The positions that are held in leadership in councils are obviously paid positions, when you're talking about convenerships, and so that becomes a different level. And I think that then becomes a coalition. That confidence supply is just that, is particular issues included in a budget or wherever in order to get something passed, and on a totally informal basis. Once you start employing people as convenership, it's a permanent thing, isn't it? Because they're there all the time. You can't give them a job and then get rid of them next week. They are there all the time, whereas the confidence supply is on an issue by issue basis, and could only be for the budget and then disappear again.
That is so helpful, Alison, particularly I think for all the journalists that are watching this. They now have a definition, which is if a political party gets convenerships out of the deal, it is by any name a coalition. And so let's move on to the changing nature of local government over the past 15 years. We have had some audience questions about this in advance of today's event around the role of ring fencing in particular. And I just wonder if you would agree with me that what we've seen over the past 15 years is local authorities receiving a lot more money from national government but have far fewer powers. Is that too pejorative? Is that too cheap an assessment of what's been going on? It does feel like whilst budgets are getting bigger in certain areas, they are bigger to deliver statutory requirements set by national government. The amount of money that local governments have to make decisions about related to their own local needs and priorities has diminished.
Yeah, I mean, that is totally fair. I was first a councillor in 2012, so that's 10 years ago now. And in the time I've been a councillor, yes, we have seen, in theory, increased money coming to local government, but the money has been tied to specific priorities that come from the government. And some of these might be good priorities, things you agree with, you know, that the 1140 hours for early learning and childcare. There might be things that are really effective in what they'd want to deliver, but it is not extra money to local councils to do what people in an area want the council to deliver. It is money coming in for a particular purpose, and as you say, being ring-fenced for that purpose. So when you look at it like that, the money to local government has decreased over the time. The money that they have freedom to work with has decreased, and that means that even though we talk about local choice and local democratic accountability and local people, local communities being able to influence their politicians, you know, that's actually decreased over the time, which is a really worrying trend. In fact, it's, you know, over 35% of it's only about 35% of a council's budget that a council has control over. So when it comes to having to make savings when things are difficult, because that is the other context we're in at the moment. We've got the demographic change happening as it is, and more people needing more support from the councils. We've got a growing need for social care and support within the communities, and therefore greater expenses from the council. And councils having to make savings, and that savings coming from such a small proportion of the budget. But the proportion of the budget it can come from is your roads maintenance, is your libraries, is your leisure services, is your local economic development support, is the things that actually matter to people. So they see a council cutting the things that matter to them, when in fact the council has no choice, because there's so much of the budget ring fence for things they have to do. When they do have to take savings, it's from a decreasing portion of the budget. And I think, I suppose, it's important to reflect on what local government does do as well, though, in its delivering local services. I think it was 2018, jointly launched the National Performance Framework with Nicola Sturgeon. And within that National Performance Framework, we jointly launched it from CoSLA because 68% of the National Performance Framework had to be delivered by local government. You know, the Scottish government across Scotland, we were not going to achieve the aims we wanted for Scotland unless local government performed for those 68% of those things in the National Performance Framework. So there is a crucial role for local government, crucial role in delivering for our communities. But with the increased ring fencing over the time, there's been less flexibility to do what's right for our communities in the way that people want. And we talk about that local and community empowerment, we love to talk about that local voice, but unless the money is there to deliver what people want locally, you know, it's not going to happen. And the other issue with ring fencing as well, you know, is the money enough to cover what's required? I think an example, case in point of that is free school meals, and the amount being provided for free school meals, which is obviously really important to help tackle poverty and inequalities in our communities in particular, and support everybody to have a decent meal during the middle of a school day. It's really important policy, but you know, at what level is it being funded? Is there cost to local government within that as well? And what does that mean for local government finances as a whole when they're having to put a bit of money into a policy which has been decided by Scottish government? It takes away even more of the flexibility locally as well. So yes, there are some very good policy initiatives coming from the Scottish government, but when they do, they need to be fully funded so they can be delivered properly and not at the expense of our local communities.
Fully funded, but with or without the ring fence? Because part of the argument goes, you see a growing culture of, and tell me the point where I'm overstating this, a degree of distrust between local and national government. So national government saying, well, we can't just give local authorities this amount of money and let them spend it however they want because we need to deliver this national priority. Meanwhile, the local authorities are articulating what you've just done, saying, well, actually, the cost of free school meals across the series of rural primary schools in Aberdeenshire is very, very different to the delivery of free school meals in an urban city centre, for example. But that's not necessarily counted in the algorithm of how funds are distributed. Is that ever going to break? Is there that culture of distrust between local and national government at the minute? Is that part of the problem?
yes, I mean, I think that is part of the problem, that we need to local government needs to be trusted more to deliver on those priorities. It's important to do that, but that comes down as well to the culture in Parliament. You know, when you have opposition parties demanding that Scottish government proves it's doing something, so then the Scottish government turns to local government and wants the proof in facts, figures, and statistics as well. So it's and not just between the Scottish government and the local government. It's a recognition across the whole of the Scottish Parliament what local government can be doing and what freedom it needs to deliver. So I'd actually widen that as part of the parliamentary debate. Needs to change if we are going to allow local government to be trusted to do what it can do. I think we clearly need, and it's been promised, it's been worked on, is a new fiscal framework for the whole funding of local government across Scotland, because we need to have that empowerment that local authorities can do what they need to do in their local communities. I think during COVID, didn't we see across our communities some remarkable, fantastic work going on when local communities and local government were together empowered just to get on with it, because there was so much need during COVID, just get on with it. And not only were they empowered to get on with it, they were also given financial resource to make it possible to happen. And we can see right across the length and breadth of our rural, urban, island communities, huge examples of local government working as an anchor organisation alongside local communities to deliver what people needed and serve local priorities at the time. You know, we need that situation all the time. We need to learn and see that worked. That worked when there was that trust there, when there was that empowerment there. And that empowerment comes in different ways. It comes in fiscal empowerment, in giving people the finances and that they can go and do what's needed in a local area. It comes from that community empowerment as well, about empowering our community groups to step forward and do what they see is needed in their local area. And it comes in what we call functional empowerment as well, in allowing councils to work in partnership with others across the public sector, others in the third sector, private sector, to help deliver in the local areas as well. You know, at the moment, that is something that needs to be worked on a long way, in that, you know, there's pockets of good experiences where in some areas, health and social care partnerships, for example, are working very closely with councils. In other areas, you'll find that because they all have their own priorities and their own reporting arrangements and their own financial arrangements, it's very difficult to get them to work together on a particular project. And if we allowed them to do that, if we allowed everybody, whether it's police, whether it's health service, whether it's the council, whoever, to come together and actually look at services needed in an area. And I think it comes back to what Campbell Christie talked about in his report all that time ago as well. You know, we need to help support efficiency develop. We need to help shared services where it's possible to happen. We need to develop prevention, and we need to develop empowerment. You know, we've been talking about the Christie report for all the time I've been a councillor as something that needs to be delivered, but it comes down to that. And we saw in COVID what can happen when those Christie principles are put into practice. So yeah, there's a need to move forward. There's a need to move forward with fiscal, the whole fiscal system we have in our country, the way that local government is financed, the way it's trusted to spend its money to meet those priorities. And, you know, if we do have something, which we do, like the National Performance Framework, which is agreed outcomes, agreed targets, I mean, linked with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it's all there set out. If we are all agreeing that is what we want to achieve, and we are agreeing that 68% of those things in that have to be delivered by local government, it's the next step to say, right, let's empower them to do this then, because we've all agreed they're the outcomes we need. And rather than have lots of little reporting requirements about lots of little stats, figures and facts and figures, which take up council time as well, just have that big picture. These are the outcomes of the National Performance Framework. We've agreed them. We want to deliver it. Let's have that as a basis of our budget discussions, whatever, going forward, so we make sure the money's in the right place.
It's so interesting to hear you reference the Christie Commission. I hope we can return to that when in the final minutes that we have in this discussion, we can talk about the implementation gap that I see growing in public policy across Scotland. But I'm going to park that for now, because we've had a few audience questions come in that seem to be stimulated by this wider question about the role of local government and what it could do if it was trusted and empowered to do so. And a really great one from Gordon McCrae. He says, Professor James Mitchell recently suggested that governing in Scotland is being approached as an effort in managing decline rather than radical change. Is that a fair analysis, and does it reflect the atmosphere in council chambers?
we've just had elections. We've got new bodies of councils. We've got lots of enthusiastic new councils elected, and I'm sure they've all come in to make a difference and drive change and take things forward. And so let's look at the moment an opportunity at what we can do. But in the wider sense, yes, though we've recognised the importance of working together, though we've recognised the importance of investing in prevention, it hasn't happened. And that links to, why have we still got child poverty? When so many people have taken this to heart and wanted to address child poverty and make a huge difference, why does it still exist? It's not from lack of will. People want to do it. So why is it not happening? And why are we not able to invest money in the things we know are needed to make a difference? And I think that maybe comes back to what James Mitchell is saying in that point as well, that managed decline, because we're not looking forward. We're not recognizing barriers and divisions and things that need to be changed and putting money there. We're with the way the budget's organised, we are doing our accountability. We're looking at our key performance indicators on things that have always been there and not looking at doing things differently to make that change. So it comes down again to that trust and empowerment to recognise what's needed in the local area, and that increasing voice of lived experience at the decision-making table as well to make that difference. But yeah, I think unfortunately we are not blossoming at the moment. We still have child poverty. We still a long way to go on meeting those climate targets that we've got as well. We've got work to do. We've still got housing as an issue where we need to certainly address the housing across Scotland as well. And and we've got various comments about education as well and what's needed within our schools. So there's lots of work to do on this, and I still believe very strongly that empowerment would enable that prevention work to happen and make that real difference.
I think one of the instigators for Gordon's question there is that Professor James Mitchell is due to give an inaugural lecture tomorrow night at the Royal Society of Edinburgh, presenting the findings of the Scottish Election Study, which is a new study looking at just how radical Scotland actually is, addressing this idea that sometimes we consider ourselves to be quite exceptional in the differences between ourselves and our neighbours across the United Kingdom, whether that's evidenced by how we vote and the policies that our governments pass. So we might hear more from Professor James Mitchell over the coming days. I suspect that will lead some of the press coverage that we'll see. Another question from the audience before I then want to ask you about the National Care Service. We've got about 10 minutes left. A question from Jamie here says, does the Metro Mayor's model currently being expanded across England offer cities in Scotland a model for improving the power and quality of democracy at a local level? Mayors for Scotland, Alison, yes or no?
It's not something that is seriously being considered at the moment in Scotland. It's not part of the agenda. I think we've got a lot to do to strengthen our councils, first of all, actually. I mean, I don't think we need structural change in the sense of how local government's organised to do that. We haven't yet empowered the local government system we've got already. We haven't yet used that to its full potential. We haven't got that partnership working across the public sector that we need to deliver. And I don't think mayors coming in would make a difference unless we get those things right anyway. So I think it's important that we look at the system we have, we see the potential that it has to deliver, and we allow it to fly. We're not doing that at the moment where we are, and we also, it comes back to encouraging more people to get involved as well. It depends on democracy in Scotland or anywhere, depends on people participating in it, either in terms of standing for election, supporting someone else to stand for election, or even going out to vote. I think they are the key aspects that we've got to get right first, before we think about, do we actually need a totally different model? We've got things we can do with what we've got already.
Okay, one other quick structural question, then we'll get to the National Care Service, because this also comes from the audience. This is from Robert. He says, only 3 minor parties managed to gain a seat at this election. Do you think the voting system puts up barriers to smaller parties to gaining seats? For example, he says the Western Bartonshire Community Party is one of those. Do you think we should aim to move away from the larger national parties at a local level, and there's precedent for this across Europe, and encourage parties like the Western Bartonshire Community Party and other local community-based parties to stand? And just before you answer that, Alison, I'll give you a second to think about it. It is worth pointing out that STV used for local government elections in other European countries operates with much larger multi-member wards. Very often in other countries we have multi-member wards of 5 or 6 councillors rather than 3 or 4 that we have in Scotland. And that means the quota that each councillor needs to get elected is much smaller. So in Scotland, you either need 20 or 25% of the vote in order to get elected because of the number of councillors in your seat. It would be more like 5 to 10% in some of those European countries. Is the barrier too high for smaller parties to get elected in local government, Alison?
Well, smaller parties or independents, I suppose, and having stood as an independent myself, yeah, I mean, the barrier does seem very high when you are a small party campaigning, and because what's the unknown, of course, is where you're going to get your second and third preferences from, and how you're going to get persuade people to vote for you there. And I suppose that comes down to the kind of engagement you're doing before an election, and persuading people to give you their second choice, their third choice, even if they can't give you their first choice. And that kind of campaigning is obviously something that we need to do more of as well to secure it. I think that's an interesting point about having the barriers not so high when you have more people being elected as well. You know. But I'm not sure that would go down at the moment. I don't think I don't think either larger wards would be the answer when we're trying to improve the subsidiarity and get decisions made at the nearest to the people as possible. I think our wards are probably the right size to do that, to make sure that we have local decision making, and if they were made larger, you're taking that away to some extent, which I think would be negative as well. I think it's people are becoming more used to the system. I think people are beginning to understand STV in the electorate and think how they might use second and third votes. But I think we've got a further way to do that, both within our schools, and make sure everybody is having this kind of knowledge in their school learning. At the moment, I fear it's only people who study modern studies actually understand the system, and anyone who doesn't opt for modern studies doesn't get the education. But also in the adult population as well, I think there's a long way to go to get people to appreciate how our system works. And I think maybe that voter education is what we need, is the best way forward between elections, so that people are appreciating that. And then the campaigning to, appreciate second and third votes, encourage people to give you those, even if they can't give you their first vote as well. Because at the end of the day, when the votes go into 9th, 10th, 11th rounds before elections are decided, that's absolutely crucial to get that.
An audience comment from somebody I know is an expert in this area, saying actually there's already a recommendation to move towards 2 to 5 instead of 3 or 4 across Scotland. Somebody who I know is connected to the work of the Electoral Reform Society, who do such good work in this area. And we don't have much time left, Alison, so I want to talk just briefly about the National Care Service. And just for a way of background for the audience, this is a policy actually first floated by the Scottish Labour Party back in 2011, with the idea that health and social care services, provision of care for vulnerable and elderly people, should be an integral part of the health system rather than something that existed separately to it. The instigation for that being largely to address what in technical terms is called delayed discharge or bed blocking, trying to get more smooth transitions between the care system and the health service. It's since then been adopted by the SNP as a main plank of their policy platform, and came into sharp focus during the pandemic, I think, where we saw some big decisions taken around people being discharged from hospital into care homes without systems in place to make sure that they were arriving without COVID, for devastating consequences, as we all know. The Scottish Government announced a full consultation into the National Care Service last year, and the results of that consultation were expected to be published before these local government elections, but that was then postponed until afterwards. And as I understand it, it certainly made the top 5 most consultation responses ever list. And it's also arguably, Alison, the single biggest bit of public service reform in 20 years of devolution, and one that's not wholly popular with local government. Can you explain why and whether it is actually a threat to local authorities' powers?
Well, it would certainly be a biggest change to public sector reform, but it's not presented as that, which is one of the big issues for it as well. I mean, I think the origins of it in the current setup anyway is in the Feely report, and what the Feely report said about changes needed to adult social care within Scotland. Much of the Feely report CoSLA agrees with. The things said there about supporting the workforce, fair work principles for the workforce, looking at person-centred care, all that was very much supported by CoSLA. Unfortunately, what's come out in the consultation is Failure Report Plus, is a lot of things that weren't actually investigated, which weren't analysed, and for which there is a very low evidence base. Things like, do you include children's services within the National Care Services? That was never part of FEELI. That hasn't been analysed or researched or consulted on, and yet it's been put into the National Care consultation. Local government knows that there needs to be change and improvement. We're not averse to change. Things need to change. We have a huge crisis, as you described, in social care. We have a workforce that's declining and need that's going up, and also a huge lack of investment in our social care. And that is the key issue. The key issue is the lack of investment to meet these needs of people across our local communities. The National Care Service involves huge structural change. It involves huge, expensive and structural change, which will take, you know, at least the life of this parliament to develop, whereas people need change now. And local government's view very strongly is that that change could be delivered now. We don't need structural change to deliver it. We know there's need to be improvement. That improvement could be invested in now. We could look at the employment issues and support the workforce more now. That could be done. That could be done on a national basis as part of national care, but without needing the huge structural change that is being proposed by the government. It's also the whole premise of it is looking at care from a very narrow angle. Care in our communities involves far more than that 15-minute visit to somebody's house to give them that care. It involves the environment in which people live, whether our paths and our parks are accessible, whether people have got green out open spaces they can get to easily and enjoy their life, whether they've got library services that can help them in their work, whether the local employability services are helping training up a workforce that can support people as well. There's a huge range. Now, housing itself, are our houses adapted to meet people's needs when they're living in their communities? There's a huge range of things needed if we are going to develop care to support people living in our communities. And the way the National Care Service consultation is looking at one aspect of that, it's not seeing the whole picture. It's not seeing what care actually means and how many of those services are actually local government delivered, and how much of it needs to be integrated, planned, made efficient, supported by others from the public sector as well, to deliver in our local areas services that really support people in those local areas. So I think you know, that premise is really important. There's an agreement that things need to change, an agreement that things need to change urgently. There's disagreement that has to be done by structural change, but that investment is fundamental to what's going on, and support for the workforce as well, because you know those fair work principles behind it are absolutely essential. So there are different views on this, but you know it's part of this. We've used the phrase before, the onion peeling of local government. You know, if you're taking away all these things that local government does, what are you actually left with? But you're not left with something that supports mental health and well-being across our communities. It's not helping people to live well locally. You can only get that support for people to live well locally if you look at care, look at social care, look at health and social care as a whole, and make sure that you're delivering and investing in that to support people living across our communities. I think it's the narrow basis, the lack of a proper knowledge base from consultation that is the problem with a lot that's been presented to the National Care Service. But CoSLA, you know, is going to work together. Obviously, this is a really important issue to work through and think through and get the right results. But I personally don't see that huge structural change that's taking time will bring the change that we all know desperately needs to happen as quickly as possible.
Really pleased to hear you mention housing adaptations there, and just in the dying seconds of this event, I'm so struck by that as being a really good example of preventative spend. If you can keep people well in their own homes for as long as possible, then you are saving huge amounts of public funds, but it does require more upfront money, and that's the sticking point more often than not. Alison, it's been absolutely fascinating to spend 60 minutes in your time today. I hope you've enjoyed your time with us here at the John Smith Centre. As I said at the start, this event is recorded and will be available for students to watch in full on the John Smith Centre website, and we'll also be breaking up little chunks of the most interesting, the best bits, and pushing those on Twitter. So thank you to Alison for being our guest today, and thank you to you for watching. If you are doing so live, Please take a moment to complete the evaluation form, which is both going to pop up on your screen and arrive in your inbox. There is no escape, so please do fill it out because it really helps us shape future events. Our next event is a real life one, an in-person event in collaboration with the organisation Women in Public Affairs. We'll be hosting the Environment Minister, Mary McCallan MSP, next Wednesday. That's the 18th of May from 9:30 in the main lecture theatre of the Joseph Black Building. If you would like to be the first to know about our future events, please take a moment also to sign up to our newsletter. Thanks for watching and bye for now.